It's certainly much easier to carry out a decision that's clear than it is to carry out one that's confused. So, if you make a rather vague decision, like I think I might possibly want to lose weight sometime, it's rather hard for the brain to get its head around what it needs to do to carry out that decision because the decision itself isn't clear.
Yeah.
But if you to say, from this moment on I'm losing weight, and I'm going to continue losing weight easily, effortlessly, naturally, until I reach the weight that's right for me, and then I'll maintain that weight for as long as it's appropriate. That's a bit clearer. And it's much easier for your brain to switch into gear and say, okay, now I know what the decision is.
Yeah.
Now I can help you carry it out because I know what the instructions are. And that getting the decision clear is probably the first and most important thing.
Okay.
Once you've got a decision clear, it's also important to commit to it. Because if you don't commit to a decision, your brain might know what the job is, but it doesn't know whether or not it's definitely doing it. So, if the decision's clear and you commit to it, then the brain knows what the decision is, it knows that you're definitely doing it, and it can say, yes, and I can help.
Yeah.
And then everything's working in the same direction. And things become so much easier that a lot of people, if they get the decision clear and they commit themselves to it, it becomes so much easier that they wouldn't even need any help from hypnosis. But of course there's other people that can get all of that right, they make a clear decision, they commit themselves to it and they stick to it, but it's not necessarily easy. And that's because over the years people get programmed or taught or we learn to do things in a particular way. And once we've learned to do something in a particular way, then we tend to carry on doing it that way, often without even needing to think about it.
Yeah.
And this goes on all through our lives. We start off by learning things like how to walk and how to talk. And that doesn't happen overnight. It's a long, slow process of learning through trial and error. When you think about learning to walk, it's a good example because exactly the same thing happens as what happens with everything else you learn.
Yeah.
First of all, you can't do it, but you notice that it can be done. You see other people doing it, and that in itself is interesting, but doesn't have any great power. You see people doing all sorts of things, doesn't mean you want to do it. But what you notice is when you see one of the grown-ups, they get up and do this thing on those two what's-it-calls. You don't know what they're called because you can't speak yet, but they do this sort of thing on two what's-it-calls, and they move across the room, and then they disappear through a hole in the wall. Can you imagine that? You're a baby, sitting in your pram or wherever you happen to be sitting, and you see the person who's been looking after you, the person who loves you and holds you and tells you wonderful things. They get up, they do this thing on those two what's-it-calls, and they disappear through a hole in the wall. To who knows where. But presumably it's the fifth dimension. You'd have some feelings about that.
Yeah.
Yeah? Yeah. I don't know what those feelings might be, but they might not be the warmest feelings in the world. You might feel loss, worry, fear. Where's she gone? She was here, she was looking after me. She did that thing on those two what's-it-calls, and now she's disappeared through a hole in the wall. But shortly afterwards, she reappears through the hole in the wall on these two what's-it-calls. And she's got something in her hand. Yeah? And she brings the thing in her hand and she puts it into your mouth. And you feel good. Now you feel good because she's reappeared. You thought she'd been whisked off to a third dimension, but she's now suddenly appeared. You automatically have good feelings, yeah? And she's got something in her hand which she puts in your mouth. And she tells you lovely things. Like, oh, you're the sweetest young thing I've ever seen. Oh, you're the most lovely baby in the whole world. And she holds you, and she gives you something in the mouth, and you feel good. Now, if this happens 2 or 3 times, it wouldn't take you very long before you started to think, if I could do that thing that she does on those two what's-it-calls, I could disappear through the hole in the wall and reappear with something to put in my mouth. of my own choosing. Now that's a good enough reason to want to walk, isn't it? Yeah? So you can imagine how that sort of motivation is the next step in the learning process. We see something happening, we work out that there's some sort of benefit to it, and we decide at some level, consciously or unconsciously, we'd like to do that because then we'd get the benefit. And so the next step is to observe. We learn a lot by observation. And we observe how it's done. It looks easy. They just stand up. They do that thing on those two what's it calls. And it's not very complicated. But the next stage of learning is always to try and put it into practice. We observe it. Maybe in our head we imagine doing it. And we imagine the benefits. Having imagined the benefits, we think it's definitely worth having a go. We try to walk. And the very first thing that happens is you fall down.
Yeah.
Yeah? You can't do it because it's a lot more complicated than it looks. So, if you're like most babies, you'll have found strategies to get you nearer and nearer to the goal. Maybe you clinged on to something like this sofa here, and when you were born you had a good grip in your hands. So you held on with your hands, you pulled yourself up, and as long as you held on with your hands you were able to do it. But the second you lifted one hand and waved to your mummy, look mummy, you fall over in the opposite direction. So if you lift the right hand, you fall over to the left and backwards. And if you lift the left hand, you fall over the other way, backwards. But the computer inside of your head is watching this. And it logs what happened. What did you just do? And what was the end result? And was that what you wanted? Did it get you nearer to the goal? And if it didn't get you nearer the goal, it says, okay, that didn't work, we just did that, this is what happened, next time we'll try something slightly different and see how that works. And it keeps on trying different combinations until it finds a combination of balance and coordination that gets you so you can lift that one hand and wave it. Yeah. And then you think, yeah, that's working. The computer logs it and says, that's now working, we'll stick with that. And then you've got to lift the other hand up. Again, you fall over. Every time you fall over, the computer logs it and says, let's try something different, see how it works. And over a period of weeks and months, you get to the point where initially you can stand, let go of the sofa, wave both hands, but then you've got to take a step. And the first time you actually try and lift one leg to move forward, you fall over in the opposite direction. And there's actually thousands of ways of falling over. You can break it down into very simple things. You can fall forwards, backwards, sideways, or you can crumple in a heap on the floor. There's more than that, but there's lots of variations. You probably did all of those, and every time you learnt something from it, and bit by bit, you learned how to put one foot ahead of the other. Felt good. Then you took the other foot ahead. And very, very shortly after that, you were doing it. And you stopped thinking about it. These days, you just get up and go. It's actually years since you've ever thought about how to walk. And it's as if at a certain point, the computer inside of your head thought, right, I've now got all the information I need to do that particular task without any conscious help from you.
Right.
And it takes it over and it runs it as a program, how to walk. And it runs it whenever it needs to, and you never ever need to think about it. And if you did need to think about it, you probably couldn't explain exactly what was involved. There's so many muscles involved, coordination, balance. It's very complicated. Now, in exactly the same way you learn to talk, to read, to write, to add up, all sorts of different things.